to Coffee with CISOs. Today I'm sitting down with Shaun Blackburn, the Chief Security Officer at True Anomaly. Shaun has spent his career leading security at some of the most influential tech companies in the world. Shaun, I'm excited to dive into your journey, your perspective on the future of security, and the lessons you've learned leading through some of tech's most complex environments. So thank you for joining me and really excited to dig in with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm pretty excited too. This is going to be fun.
So, Shaun, I always like to start these conversations, before talking about your professional career. So, I actually wanted to leap back in time and understand, what was young Shaun like growing up? I know you're in the Bay Area now, but did you grow up elsewhere? What was your childhood like?
Completely different in a completely different place. So my dad is a farmer, and I grew up mostly in the Pacific Northwest, in Oregon and Washington, in tiny little towns that most people haven't heard of. I went to elementary school, middle school in Hermiston, Oregon. Did a lot of my growing up there. So my first jobs were either working on my dad's farm or doing other like things around town. But even before that, I actually got into computers when I was pretty young. My family brought home a Tandy 1000 HX when I was 5. I just wanted to play games on the dumb thing. And back then, to play games, you basically had to learn how the computer really worked internally. So that got me my start into computers, and the love for it just carried through. And so really I spent all of that time growing up trying to figure out how to get where I needed to be to have more access to what was going on.
Did that come from, I know you mentioned your dad was a farmer. Did that come from your mom of just wanting to expose you to like technology at a young age, or was it just something that was kind of new out there that they wanted to bring home for you and the family?
Good question, and probably an unexpected answer. It was actually my dad. And the reason why is he has a master's degree in farming. And something that I learned growing up on those farms is that we have this vision of farmers of these cowpokes out with a straw in their teeth staying in the field, but it's actually a fairly high-tech industry. Even as I was growing up, spending time on this farm, they had self-driving tractors that would position themselves and then go down the field to be able to plant things uniformly. They were using drones before most folks to be able to fly and see how the crops were doing from aerial views. And they had computers on the farm. In fact, it was a very large corporate farm. And there was even a small data center that I remember having a mainframe computer, like the kind that takes up half a room and sounds like a washing machine that's breaking. And they had COBOL and Fortran programmers on staff. Some of my first jobs was actually rewriting Fortran code for the Y2K bug on the farm in some of their farming software. So he's a farmer at heart, but he recognized what technology can do, and he brought it home. I think mostly for him to be able to do some work at home, but I co-opted it a lot for my gaming.
I love it. And honestly, that's awesome that you can say that you started out your software engineering journey on a farm with your dad and just getting to play around and poke with the family business. I know you mentioned you tinkered around with computers, but what was your shoe into security? Like, did you have your sights set on security at a young age, or is that something you kind of stumbled upon?
But not for great reasons. So in middle school and high school, was living in this town called Hermiston, Oregon. It's like 15,000 people. And I was simultaneously frustrated and bored there. There wasn't a lot going on. BBSs were becoming the way to connect to other people via computers. And there was one locally that was only running when the guy would actually turn it on. And I really kind of just wanted to get out of that. And really, my whole life, what led me into security was I've always had issues with authority. And I've also I really root for an underdog. Like I have trouble going with whatever is mainstream or common. It leads into all kinds of stuff, good and bad. But in high school, I started getting 2600 magazine. There were a couple other folks at school who were into breaking computer systems, and they had their own little local zine that I started reading and then contributing to. And I would get the DEF CON talks after the conference happened, and I wanted so much to be out of Hermiston and off somewhere where this stuff was going on. But and I started just trying to learn and play with things. And so I got into all kinds of interesting mischief. Some of it ended up turning into an arrest at a high school for essentially breaking into the high school's computer systems. There's a lot of the details about that that I want to tell, but I really shouldn't. But suffice it to say, yeah, I was in security, but on the wrong side of things as a bored, unscrupulous youth. And but what I came out of that with was a real interest in how computers can fail in ways that are useful to attackers. And so through my whole career, there's a lot of different lenses and viewpoints and experiences people bring to the industry. But mine is one of coming from the attacker side of things. And to this day, I skip all the big business and leadership conferences. I still go to the hacker conferences because I resonate with that and I resonate with the crowd there. But more importantly, that's where I feel like I'm learning things that are very applicable to my job, even though my job is much more hands off keyboard and about leadership these days.
I feel like a lot of security practitioners, their shoe in is most definitely just tinkering, getting themselves into a lot of mischief. So maybe we'll get your story of breaking into high school over a drink with the team one day. Would love to hear that story. Um, but what is it about those smaller kind of hacker conferences that is important to you? I know you mentioned from like an attack angle, but what would you say now are the things that maybe some executives are missing by not going to those types of events?
Deep understanding is perhaps some of it. I've definitely switched now, so I can get a lot out of the talks that are at some of the other conferences. So I now have an appreciation for that. But just where I started, my mindset when I started was that the source of power in this industry is knowledge about how things actually work. And especially in the early days, it was not always a healthy thing, but it was kind of this one-upsmanship of who understands the system better to be able to pull off bigger stunts, bigger hacks. And and that has kind of stuck with me that that's still for a lot of some of it's just as a spectator, it's fun to watch what folks can do, but it also is an appreciation that then informs what you should do on defenses and to inform what you should be ready for. And so it applies in so many other ways. And I feel like if you step too far away from that, then you don't really know the risks that you're up against, except for the high level ones that you put on your risk register that are fairly obvious, but you don't really know where your exposures are and what those could turn into.
Yeah, and I think that's so important now with how quickly AI is evolving. Like, just to be in the know and see what attackers are using, it's really important for enterprises to understand, especially from a defense standpoint. So, seeing how creative attackers are getting with AI is really important. Just being in the field, keeping an ear to the ground. So, I think that's awesome that you still attend those events as well. Now, kind of shifting gears, I know you've had quite the track record in tech. You've led security at companies operating at massive scale, so Amazon, Netflix, Airbnb, Gemini, and now True Anomaly. What's one lesson that has stayed consistent across every environment?
Technology and the security risks change on every single one of them. And so it's not that. The lesson to me is more what I look for in the places that I'm going. Each one of those is in a completely different industry. And I didn't start out knowing that that's what I wanted, but I figured out after the first job change that I get a lot out of changing industries when I change jobs because I love to learn. And being just thrown deep end into a completely new industry environment forces you to get your head above water really fast. And so it's not that there's actually really much commonality between it. It's really that I want to get thrown into a place where I'm forced to learn things. And yes, you end up starting to pattern match as you do that. You know, I can draw similarities to what I'm doing now to certain things at other companies, but I don't know that there's like a through line to that I could point to. It's really though, I think a very useful trait, probably in any engineering relevant discipline, but certainly in security is staying close to learning, having the beginner's mindset, being driven and motivated by that and seeking it out.
And I would say too, since every single company you worked at is different industry, like what does that onboarding look like for yourself, and how have you personally been able to adapt your security leadership at each of these companies?
I'm in the thick of it right now. So the company I work for is in aerospace doing defense work. And there's a big, there's a mountain of things that I need to learn about both of those industries. And I end up in meetings where people are speaking in back-to-back acronyms, and I have no idea what they're talking about. Um, it, it's it's really just like you have to go in very intentional about it. I set up a couple of custom GPTs that are just there with a prompt, and I could just drop in an acronym, and it already knows kind of the context of what I'm doing, and it'll define them for me. Little tools like that are really useful. But I also force myself to start to use those terms and acronyms before they feel comfortable, so that it just forces my brain to learn them a lot faster. But even aside from that, kind of more on the security side, one thing that I've found and that I really look for now in a position is I get the most satisfaction not when the scale is necessarily huge, that brings certain kinds of challenges and certain things to learn, but the types of challenges that I get more satisfaction out of are when there is extremely real security risk, uh, when the attackers are at the door regularly and you're having to do a lot to keep them out. It means that the work about what needs to be done and the discussions about it are less academic and philosophical. I've spent a lot of time in meetings where people are just, you know, spouting their philosophies about, well, we should do this, but not that, and well, what happens if this happens? And I like working at these companies because, first off, you learn the attacks really quickly that are relevant to your company and who the attackers are. And they will be happening with a good frequency. So that informs what you should do. You don't have to have a philosophy about it. And if you do, it's going to get thrown out the window as soon as the next incident comes along. And to me, I find that to be the most useful type of environment for me to be in.
Right, they're just throwing you straight in, and instead of hypotheticals of talking about what if this happens, you experience it on, massive scale. So you get to learn by jumping into practical defense.
100%. Yeah. And even an example of that. So my last job was working at the cryptocurrency exchange Gemini. And there are nations that fund their militaries by stealing cryptocurrency. And so they put highly paid, very skilled attackers on it. And at the core, this is magic, irreversible internet money. And so once it's gone, it's gone. And you really have to step up your game. You have to have things really locked down very well. You have to have an instant response capability that's very mature with detections that are going to work for these things. And if you have any tiny chink anywhere in that armor, they're going to find it. And I, in many ways, I thrived in that. I liked that, we would have stuff going on just about every single week related to threat activity. And I found that fun and invigorating.
That that part too is so important to the CSO role, being able to perform in high pressure environments. And so knowing your personality of just being super curious and wanting to be a long time learner, like what advice do you have for someone who is jumping into a security leadership role, who may have, some imposter syndrome? Maybe they're moving from an individual contributor role into a management role, or, moving up the ranks in an IC lane. What practical advice do you have for someone who may be feeling a little bit insecure in their role and want to start gathering confidence to be able to perform under those really high pressure environments?
Yeah, a few suggestions. First off, there is both an art and a science to those sorts of transitions, and there are endless books and other resources to go to, and many of them are great. I find that the best managers and leaders are ones who have actually formally spent time studying it by reading books or going to other resources. And so that would be a first one. And depending on the individual and their situation and my observations, I'll usually give them a couple of specific recommendations of things that they should go and read. But if they know themselves, they could probably go and figure those things out. Another one is that, particularly on the one transitioning to be a people manager, coming out of usually like an engineering hands-on technical role, the mindset you're in is that the job is about the technology. And you'll usually bring that into your first management role, which is useful on one hand, but it's actually missing the fact that that role is changing to be about people, not about technology. And you're really there to deliver through others by enabling them and empowering them and breaking down barriers for them. Um, I find that one of the most telling traits about if someone's going to be success transitioning to a management role is if they get satisfaction out of watching other people achieve things, maybe even more than watching that for themselves. And so that would be something to probably introspect on and think about and figure out how you can get to that point. But it's the first step is to shift your thinking to how do I make this about the people that are on the team and not about the technology they're dealing with. And then you also talked about folks who are moving to a more senior level on an IC track. And I think that actually still applies because especially as you get to something like a staff or a principal level engineer, really that role becomes, sure, there is some hands-on engineering and architecting, but it also becomes more of being a taste setter, is what Amazon calls it internally at the company, where it is about influence and it is about enabling others. It is enabling and influencing much more specifically around the technology directions and the solutions and the architectures. But you will want to focus on your ability to do those. And so previous to that, you might not have need to care about like what you wear at work or how you present yourself and some of the how you speak in meetings. And that's the time to probably focus on that just a little bit more. Really, a lot of what we can achieve is based off others' perceptions of us. And so just accepting that and spending some time polishing yourself so that you are accepted at the highest level that you should be is a great way to spend some time.
That's such great advice. And, from doing some LinkedIn sleuthing on you, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know you started as a technical program manager and then moved into security operations management. And so I actually wanted to pick your brain and see what was that transition like? Was that something that was brought upon you, or is that something you sought out? And if so, how did you do that internally?
So I have to back up a little bit to explain kind of what was going on there, and then I'll be a little bit vulnerable with what was going through my head. So just before that happened, I had left Amazon to go do grad school. I did a master's degree at Carnegie Mellon University that was actually focused on security engineering leadership, was what the program was on. And when I came out of that program, I interviewed back at Amazon, and they made me two offers. They said, hey, you passed our engineering bar. We'd love to make you a security engineer on the team. Or we see that you've been in more of like a leadership and management role or education program. What about a TPM role on the team? And the main thing that was actually going through my head in making that decision, unfortunately, was imposter syndrome. And whether I had the technical chops to really succeed and excel over time as an engineer. And my upbringing, I was saying before, is really that like hardcore engineering is kind of the foundation for everything. And I had some self-doubt. And so going the TPM side felt like a safer bet, especially since that had been the last 2 years of my education was geared more towards that. I think in retrospect, I shouldn't have let the voices in my head shout quite so loud. I probably could have done either one, but it ended up really allowing me to play to strengths that I didn't recognize at the time. And so that TPM role went quite well. And within, I think it was 6 or 7 months, I was asked to manage that team as we were doing a global expansion. And then I went on this really fun ride for another 3.5 years of taking it from this one small, scrappy team of like 4 security analysts and engineers in Seattle to a global follow the sun or doing around the clock response with detection engineering, kind of all the pillars of the entire detection response space. I learned a lot. And in some ways, it was an unfortunate thing about imposter syndrome, but it ended up pushing me to something that worked out great.
Absolutely. And I think it's one of those things where you had to test it out and to almost, set your feet down a little bit on the ground post grad and see if this was something that you truly wanted to pursue. But then after being there for a while, you knew, all right, I definitely have what it takes. Let's kick it up a notch and do the role that I had my sights set on. So I think that is a good lesson, and it's very human. I feel like a lot of people will be susceptible to imposter syndrome. It's very natural. And that's what I like to dig into during these conversations. Every security leader I've met with has faced imposter syndrome. It's just, a human element of being in your career. I actually wanted to dig into your time at CMU. I know you were a part of the Venture Bridge program to mentor CMU students and alumni startup founders. So, is there any piece of advice you find yourself giving to almost every founder you mentor, or is it more of a personal approach after meeting the startups individually?
Mostly the personal approach. I try not to give canned regurgitated things because I think every founder and every founding story and every product is probably different and unique. And if it's not, then why are they doing it? Because there's probably someone else that's doing it. So mostly it's bespoke, but there are a couple common themes that come through that are just from my biases and what I value when I'm looking for security solutions. One of them that I'm pretty sure I suggest to just about everyone that I end up giving input or advice to is around the idea of giving something away for free. And a big part of where this comes from is I am a diehard open source Linux nerd. Driving around in Hermiston in my first car, I had two bumper stickers. One said "Free Kevin," and then the other one was the Linux Tux Penguin. And so, like that tells probably a lot of people a lot about who I was at that time. But I I love the power of open source, partly for what it can just do decentralized to lift up the entire industry. But also, I think it is a phenomenal way, one of the phenomenal ways to do sales and marketing when you don't have to actually go out and do sales and marketing. And we see tons of examples of this, right? I think an obvious one early on in HashiCorp's story, they were just giving away large parts of Terraform and other things like this. And it created this pull for their products into the companies where the engineers would fall in love with it and start using it at work and in other places. And then they come to work and they're begging to have it there. And so it ends up getting pulled in. And then they don't have to do the sales team with the CISO and trying to get it pushed in from the top. And that entire model, I think, is just more effective. And I think that it forces you to do several things. First, it forces the engineers in the founding team to interface with the actual practitioners, with the folks who are going to use their product, so they can get boots on ground, real low-level feedback, and not from a project manager or a team manager who's probably going to be a step or two removed. But then it does create this bit of a flywheel of folks. If you actually give something of value away, people will generally use it. And then if you have things to offer related to that, it also just starts the relationship from a place of more trust where they already know what you do. They've gotten some value out of it, and you don't have to start with a hard sales pitch.
That is such great advice. And I feel like it's also industry agnostic of just having that philosophy of giving back first. And then you'll naturally create these champions who want to use your product, want to vouch for you, want to pull in their friends, their family, their network. So that's such great advice. And probably something we could start using at Lockstep as well with our portfolio companies. And I do, of course, want to pick your brain a little bit more about cybersecurity. So I know we're entering an era where AI is changing both offense and defense. So what shifts are CISOs underestimating right now from your perspective?
That's a hard one because I feel like all eyes are on AI right now. I think that folks are doing their best to estimate, and who is underestimating what is probably case by case, to be honest. Maybe if I try to zoom out a little bit, though, there's a moment for me, like 3 years ago, where I was like, what is all this fuss about? And I started like playing around with some of the tools. And there was this moment where it clicked. It was in the early days of having an LLM in your IDE, and it was mostly like kind of some basic open source ones available. And so I plugged in, I was playing around with it at home, and there was this moment where for me it just kind of clicked, and not just what was possible then, but it laid out the next, I could see where this is going to a certain degree. And it's my belief that this shift is probably a bigger shift than the internet created, or at least on that scale. And it's definitely going to happen faster than that one did, right? We had to get everyone to have a computing device and then to become fluent in it and then to get them all connected before the internet thing could really work out. Whereas this, we've all got the technology. We just need to get everyone to be more AI fluent. And so it's not really like a CISO specific underestimation thing, but I think the industry, many folks in the industry overall are underestimating how fast this is happening, how fast it's going to keep accelerating, and how complete of a change this is very likely to make for just about everything, to the degree that it's very difficult to really predict what all of those are going to be. You could start reading science fiction books to get some theories on some of where this is actually going. I think it's that, like trying to think bigger about not just where we are and the flaws with some of the current models and hallucinations and integrations, but where is this actually going? And use that as your North Star for what the attacker's capabilities are going to be and how you should be pushing this into your teams to leverage the power that it creates.
And how have you personally like wrapped your arms around it at True Anomaly? Like, do you have any practical tips for, CISOs or heads of security that are trying to, just get ahead of everything?
You have to dedicate time to learn. It is moving so intensely fast that nobody can even keep up, even if they're spending a lot of time on it. So when I had that light bulb moment, uh, I spent like a week almost like scared and worried. And I was like, so what do I do? This could change everything about my career. And I said, what I need to do is dedicate to spending time every single day actively learning about this. And so that's been my goal, is to set aside 1 hour a day doing active learning about AI. And it could be reading, it could be trying out a new tool, it could be vibe coding a thing, it could be any of those, actively learning it. And I don't always hit that goal, but I try to have that goal out there. And and then that creates, first off, I love that. I mean, it adds to my desire to learn. I'm always getting to try out the new tools, and it gives myself an excuse to do that. But it usually means that I'm pretty close to like the latest, the zeitgeist of what's going on and what the new tools, where the interest is, and what might be valuable. And so then I can bring that to work. And oftentimes I can suggest, hey, we've been doing it this way. We actually should go and look at this other tool, or hey, we found this other really great open weight model. Let's take a look at it. So it definitely allows me to help steer a lot of the conversations.
I think that's a great approach because you're thinking like an engineer, you can speak the language, and you personally have anecdotes that you can share with the team where it's not, again, to your point earlier, it's not philosophical. It's, hey, I spent some time in this. I think we should apply X, Y, and Z because of what I've seen personally and what I'm, reading in the market. So I think that's great advice for everyone because every conference that you see now, the theme is like, how do we get a grip on everything? And I think something that's reassuring to other leaders as well is no one really knows. Like, we're all figuring it out together, and just the more that you can equip yourself with new information will be helpful as a leader. So that's
It
really helpful.
absolutely does. And I think it compounds too, right? Like the more you know, the more you see other applications for it. Literally last night, just for bedtime, my son, we had a project a few months ago where together we pieced together and built a gaming computer for my kids. And it was out of old parts I had in a drawer. And he came in and said, hey, Dad, it keeps rebooting with an error. And so I went in and I installed Gemini CLI and just gave it access to start troubleshooting. I gave it the prompt, here's what's going on, here's the error, and go and troubleshoot it. And then it was a great moment while he sat and watched it go through troubleshooting steps of trying to figure out what was going on. And I was able to teach him. It was a really good learning opportunity for him to see that and explain the commands that it was running and what even is a command line interface. He hadn't seen that before. But also, I've gotten to the point now that when something like that happens, someone comes and says, hey, there's a problem, my immediate reaction is, how do I hook an LLM up to it to take care of that for me? which is really empowering. And it's still useful to understand what it's doing, right? Like there was twice as it was going through a troubleshooting workflow where I canceled what it was doing because I thought it was going in the wrong direction and gave it some new information to redirect it because I've spent a lot of time fixing gaming computers too. So you still need mastery of the underlying technology, but it it's like a turbo button where it can do a lot of the grunt work and then you're just steering it.
And those foundational skills are so important too. So I'm sure that was really helpful for your son to learn, the why behind everything, because the technology is only as powerful as, the person using it. And so just teaching him the fundamental basics. And I know that's something that we've debated internally at Lockstep. Is college education important now as an engineer with how quickly everything is evolving on the technology side? And I think for us, we're education optimists, so we think it's important to set, those foundational skills. But now there's so many entry points for engineers, which is really exciting. You don't need to have the traditional background, but to your point, it's important to understand the input so that you can properly manage your systems.
You said totally agree.
And I did want to end on a personal note because this is something that we bonded over during the Lockstep RSA event, and that was your love for EDM, which I'm passionate about as well. So, for our listeners, Shaun is a drum and bass fan, if anyone wants to talk shop with him after this podcast. But what is it about EDM that resonates with you? And do you have any kind of go-to drum and bass artists that you listen to? Do you listen to during work?
Yeah, so what it means to me at this point, it means a whole lot of amazing memories. But what got me into it was what I was saying before that I have trouble going with the crowd or the group. And when I was growing up, the crowd in the group was all driving pickup trucks, wearing cowboy boots with big belt buckles, and everywhere I went was country music. And I now have no disrespect for country music, but at the time, I wanted to be as far away from what everyone else was doing as possible. And in this little town, as I started getting access to the early internet, I was one of the I was the first person I knew who was on Napster, and I wasn't trying to download the latest Britney Spears album like everyone else was. I was trying to find the one person in England who would finally connect to their computer so I could download the song Runaway by DJ Lunacy and finally have this rare 1995 era drum and bass track. And so it started as that, as this little seed. I had a friend who also nurtured it. He was into Moby and some of the more mainstream artists and we started on this journey together. But in those days, it was so hard to get the music that the main way to do it was on vinyl. And so I didn't. I just started buying vinyl because I wanted to have the songs. And pretty soon I got two turntables, and then I was getting booked to DJ at parties, and it kind of turned into this whole passion and life around trying to find very rare records. I would do trips to other countries to go digging for rare records, and it almost like a skill set that I wanted to build. And it's always been about the music for me. I love that. I still have friends who are very active in the community. I go to shows with quite a lot, and I'm really passionate about it. When I'm in the car, that's all that's playing. My kids sing along with me to rave music wherever we're going. You asked about favorite artists. So I actually, drum and bass is one of my favorite genres. Really, the whole spectrum of hard dance is where my head is at constantly. I'd have to say my favorite artist overall is a British producer named Darren Styles. I've been a fan of his for about 30 years. He has reinvented himself many different times as parts of different groups and then as a solo artist, starting out in early drum and bass and then through into happy hardcore and now into more of like a hard dance thing. And I've seen him play a ton of times. I've played at events with him. He's just a sweet guy, and I absolutely love his music.
I love that. And I think something we talked about too at RSA was just the community that EDM has built, Insomniac especially. They really have nailed down what it means to build community and also lift people up at events. Like this all happened organically, just with like people's love for music, people's love for taking care of each other, and just creating like a safe environment for people to have fun. And so that's what I love about EDM as well. And Darren Styles, we actually got to see at EDC a few years ago, and his set was so fun. Also, I was going to tell you, Worship is a really great group. I think there's about five drum
Ah,
and bass folks, Sub
yeah.
Focus. So
Okay.
Love it. But maybe we could even have you DJ at one of our upcoming Lockstep events
We'll
and
see. We'll
surprise
see.
everyone. Yeah. We'll make Lucas learn how to DJ. Maybe you guys can go back to back together or something to close out an
An
event.
MC, put him on the mic. I think he'd be better there.
That's true. Yeah, maybe he can MC and then you and I can do a back to back set.
Absolutely. Let's do it. I'm
I,
game.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Sean. Really, just thank you for sitting down with me, letting me pick your brain on, your journey into cyber, your leadership style, and then also just getting to expose your EDM love to the community of practitioners that we have here. But you're awesome, and I really hope to see you in person again soon. Thank you so much for joining me.
This has been really fun. Thanks for having me.
Wanna